Good morning, and thank you all for joining our webinar. Today, we have more than 130 people so far and 300 registrations from all over the world, so hopefully more people would come. My name is Dragan Radic. I work at the ILO Enterprises Department, and I'm the head of the SME Unit. Yesterday, we learned from WHO that the coronavirus may never go away. Almost 300,000 people worldwide have died with coronavirus. And more than 4.3 million cases are already recorded. We've also lost millions of jobs, and many people went already out of the business. Economies are shrinking as we speak, and the worst thing perhaps of all is that we don't know, and no one can really tell us when would all this be over. Nevertheless, we have to stay positive, right? In every crisis, there are opportunities. So SMEs, we know, are the beating heart of global economy. Their economic contribution to GDP is big, and they provide most of the employment globally. Hence, SMEs will play a key role in propelling a sustainable and resilient economy moving forward. And this is exactly why we're here today. We are very keen to understand more of what support is really needed immediately and in the medium term to get SMEs back on their feet and to enable them to perform better moving forward. So just before we start, I would like to give you a couple of simple ground rules. Your mics are muted, as you noticed, and your cameras are off. This is by default. Considering we have so many participants, we would really encourage your written comments and questions on the sidebar, and then I would like to pick them up when all presentations are finished. There is one change in the agenda. Unfortunately, we lost a presenter from Ukraine, as it seems, but we have a backup plan, and I'm very happy to welcome Stefan. Stefan is SCORE Asia Manager. And basically, he will be presenting to us the key findings from a global SCORE survey that we've completed recently as to what challenges are facing SMEs globally. So without further ado, let me now turn to our panelists and to welcome each of them. So from South Africa, of course, we have Amelia Nahido. Amelia is Executive Manager, Competitiveness Improvement Services within Productivity South Africa. And then we have also from Vietnam, our colleague who is actually the director of the SME agency there. And from ILO SCORE program, we have Stefan Ehrlich, as I said, who would be presenting global SME survey.
Dragan, sorry to interrupt. It's just Andrea managed to join us.
Oh, Andrea,
yes.
That's great. Okay, so we're going back to the old structure, and Andrea will also then speak after Amelia. So Amelia, let's start with you first. Could you please tell us how is the situation in South Africa today? What are the key challenges that SMEs are facing and how to go about helping them? Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dragan. I'd just like to say good morning, good day, and good evening to some of the participants here today. And thank you to the opportunity as well that ILO has afforded us. Good morning to our panelists and the different representatives. I'm going to be sharing my screen, if I could just get some assistance if needed. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. From South Africa, I am Amelia Naidu. I'm the Executive Manager from Productivity SA. So I'm going to start with just a brief about Productivity SA before I go into the status of coronavirus. Productivity SA is a Schedule 3A organization, meaning that we are a public entity of the Department of Employment and Labor with the responsibility to fulfill an economic and social mandate of government. So our mandate is to promote employment growth and productivity, thereby contributing to South Africa's social and economic development and competitiveness. Our vision is to lead and inspire a productive and competitive South Africa. This is a huge mandate and vision to achieve. Therefore, linkages or partnerships with our strategic partners nationally and internationally, like that with ILO, is important for us to achieve these objectives of our organization. Our mission, so how do we go about doing this, is to improve productivity by diagnosing, advising, implementing, monitoring, and evaluating solutions aimed at improving South Africa's sustainable growth, development, employment through the increase of competitiveness. The status of coronavirus in South Africa. Our president alluded to the fact that the coronavirus pandemic has disrupted our lives and damaged our economy, and its severity will continue to take a heavy toll in the weeks, months, and even years, as Dragan has even mentioned. The pandemic has resulted in sudden loss of income for business and individuals alike, deepening poverty and increasing hunger. The urgent and dramatic measures that were taken by our government to delay the spread of virus was absolutely necessary. Our first case of coronavirus, as indicated here, was on the 5th of March. The national lockdown was initiated on the 27th of March for 21 days, and thereafter it was extended for a further 2 weeks. So in total, we went through a national lockdown for 5 weeks, and as of the 1st of May, we are now at a level 4, which I will explain in a little bit detail just now. The national lockdown has given us the space to better respond to the inevitable rise in infection and to thereby save tens of thousands of lives. It has been devastating, and it has had a devastating effect on our economy, and is nothing compared to the catastrophic human, social, and economic cost if the coronavirus could spread among our people unchecked. Our current status is, as of yesterday, 11,350 people or cases, and the active cases is 6,787. Unfortunately, we have 206 deaths. The pandemic required economic response that is equal to the scale of disrupting it and its cost. So there is a 3-phase approach that government has taken. And the first phase began in mid-March, when we declared the coronavirus pandemic as a national disaster. This included a broad range of measures to mitigate the worst effects of the pandemic on business, on communities, and on individuals. The measures included tax relief, the release of disaster relief funds, emergency procurement, wage support through the UIF, and funding to the small businesses. We then embarked on the second phase of the economic response to stabilize the economy, address the extreme decline in supply and demand, and protect jobs. As part of this phase, there was an announcement of a massive social relief and economic support package of 500 billion, which amounted to around 10% of our GDP. The third phase is now the phase going forward after the pandemic. It is the economic strategy we will implement to drive the recovery of our economy as the country emerges from this pandemic. Central to the economic strategy will be measures that will embark upon to stimulate demand and supply through interventions such as substantial infrastructure build program, the speedy implementation of economic reforms, the transformation of our economy, and embarking on all other steps that will ignite inclusive economic growth. So we are currently in a risk-adjusted strategy for economic activity. As you would see here, it's an alert system that's with levels of restrictions. Ongoing feedback loop informs decisions to remain on a particular level. We moved from level 5 and into level 4 on the 1st of May, as I indicated. So we went from high virus spread or low readiness to a moderate to high virus spread to a low to moderate readiness. The restrictions that have been imposed is due to a number of factors. It's a phased approach of easing on the lockdown that the government has initiated. The National Command Council will review the alert level at each meeting and will impose on lower or higher levels when necessary. So there are many restrictions on public life and gatherings. No visitation to family, as well as higher risk activities will remain regardless of the alert level. So the risk-adjusted strategy has criteria, and this is what I'm alluding to now. The criteria to return to activity. This was specifically used by government when it came to the sector-specific manufacturing or the different industries that need to be opened gradually. So it went with three aspects, one being economic value at risk, second being transmission risk, and third being economic stress. So the economic value at risk was looking at sectorial contribution to GDP, and as you see there, the prevalence of SME and informal sector, linkages to the rest of the economy, so taking employment also into consideration. The transmission risk was looking at other aspects of the disease itself, the profile of the workplace, the geographical location of the workplace, practical mitigation measures, and feasibility of the mitigation measures. And the third aspect was the economic stress. Here for us, it's relating to the facing, imminent retrenchments, when it comes to facing permanent and irreversible damage, the jobs that are at stake for our economy, for our people. So these are the main considerations for the risk-adjusted strategy for economic activity. So our government has put many interventions in place, and our president actually spoke to us yesterday. He briefed the country on what has been done so far. SA has introduced an economic and social relief package worth over 500 billion that I spoke about. That is $28 billion, equivalent to that, to help companies in distress, to save jobs and to provide some income to informal workers and poor households. Since it was established, the special COVID-19 relief scheme of an unemployment insurance fund has paid out 11 billion to 2 million employees, employed by over 160,000 companies in distress. This was said to help companies stay afloat and save millions of jobs. The various funds that were established to provide support for small businesses included the initiatives of the Department of Small Business Development, the Department of Tourism, the Industrial Development Corporation, and the South African Future Trust have provided direct assistance to over 27,000 enterprises. So as of 13th of May, the 200 billion COVID-19 loan guarantee scheme, which is a guarantee by the government, has begun to process applications from small and medium-sized enterprises. So when we speak to business itself and the core of what we are talking about today, the priorities for business post-COVID. So a couple of our manufacturing companies have given us feedback also to say nobody was ready for this pandemic. Nobody was ready even when the opening of the economy started to happen. So at level 3, there are a number of manufacturers, according to their sector, that have been opened, if they are essential workers, if they are providing essential services. But a number of manufacturers are also working at a 30% capacity at this moment. And that's what's allowed at this level. So when it came to the preventative measures, these are going to be key to the success of any business or the livelihoods of these businesses and the people going forward. So the department has outlined work preparedness factors that they need to consider, focusing on high, medium, low risk exposure, implementing workplace controls, screening, engineering controls, ventilations, installing physical barriers, and such as face shields, and administrative controls as well, like trainings, registers, emergency communication plans, as well as safe work practices. But what is required by business is to have the support from a policy perspective. So to provide COVID policy, personal protective equipment policy, test and screening of employees for COVID policies, working from home policies, because this is what's the environment going forward, working from home risk assessment where it's possible, traveling to and from work using public transport risk assessment, workplace risk assessment, exposure to infectious diseases, work readiness after lockdown, control measures guidelines, e-learnings, and so forth.
Amelia,
so these are the requirements.
Amelia, sorry, you're just over 10 minutes. Can you now be wrapping up slowly? Thank you.
No problem. So these are the protocols that SMEs also need to have in place. The workplace disease surveillance and central COVID committee itself. With the prevention measures that have to be here, the monitoring system must be also in place to ensure compliance and safety protocols and identify infections among employees. The second aspect that business has related to, or that has raised, is the access to finance. And there's a number of schemes that the government has provided, but also with business itself, we're talking about the financial institutions, there are some relief measures that have been imposed. So as you can see, there's an SME debt relief finance scheme that has been provided by the Small Business Development, Department of Small Business Development, which is a soft loan, but there is criteria also that companies need to adhere to be able to access this. And these are the number of different reliefs that have been put in place, including that of tax. But the last aspect, which is the third important aspect for business, is efficiency and effectiveness. To be able to survive, we'll never be able to capture what has been lost. But businesses must be able to contain, be able to assess their businesses, be able to now meet customers' needs. So with regard to when we sat in a footwear and leather webinar, an international one of the key priorities was saying that we must be able to meet customer needs by ensuring that quality is adhered to, efficiency is adhered to, so on time, every time, as well as the cost is contained. So how do we do that? And this could be through capacity planning, where businesses now are not functioning at 100% capacity. What can they do differently? Resource allocations, line balancing within businesses itself, re-looking at their production plan as well as their business model, and going forward from a short-term to a medium-term strategy, even looking at digitization. So Productivity SA has the number of capacity planning tools that we are implementing right now, looking at the 30% capacity, 50% going forward, and even once you hit 100%, how do we ensure that it is efficient and effective? So with that being said, our country and our world will never be the same. We are resolved not merely to return our economy to where it is or where it was before the coronavirus, but to forge a new economy in a new global reality. The President alluded to the fact that building on the cooperation that is being forged among all social partners during this crisis will accelerate the structural reforms required to reduce the cost of doing business, to promote localization and industrialization, to overall state-owned enterprises, and to strengthen the informal sector, close quote. Our new economy must use every resource, every capability, every innovation we have in service of the people of this country. Our new economy must open new horizons and offer new opportunities. Thank you.
Great, thank you for this, Amelia. I like your closing remarks. Our country and the world we live in will never be the same. That's a big statement, but that's true. And we picked up the priorities for SMEs straight away on the COVID-19 prevention side, and access to finance also, and business improvements in the short and long term. So there will be a couple of questions for you. But let me now go to Andrei Slabinsky. Andrei, it's very good that you actually came to us. I thought we lost you, so it's fantastic. So let me introduce you properly. Andrei Slabinsky is the director of the SME Development Office of Ukraine. So Andrei, the floor is yours, about 10 to 12 minutes, please.
Hello everyone, thank you for the invitation, Dragan. Sorry for some delay in joining the conference. Just a few words on SME Development Office, which is currently the advisory body to the Ministry of Economy and primarily funded and supported by the European Union as a milestone to implementation of the SME strategy in Ukraine, adopted 2 years ago, and which is just exactly in the moment of being reconsidered on how to respond on these new challenges which were not planned at the time, for sure. I will now switch to the presentation I have. Can you see my screen now?
Yeah, you can.
Okay, here it is. So just a few highlights I prepared to share with you what is the current context we have in COVID-19 in Ukraine. The statistics to start, I believe, is what are the health implications we have. So here you can see the very last data we have. According to the expectations reported by the Prime Minister and the Ministry of Health of Ukraine, we are exactly in the moment of, I would say, the top implications of the coronavirus in Ukraine, as we have just finished the traditional national holidays which are taking place in the start of May. So the increase in the statistics is something which we expect to see, or hopefully not to see, in the days to come. And that will actually influence how the policy approach is going to be shaped in the weeks to come. Here are some impact expectations we have if we're talking about more economic context. Just the key data for you to understand what is the portion, what is the contribution of SMEs in Ukraine, if we're talking about added value, which is 64%. 79% is the share of employment created by SMEs in Ukraine, and 37% is the contribution if we're talking about taxes. There are several selections I've made to illustrate how we expect key sectors, except in agro sector, are going to suffer. We're talking about trade, industry, hotels and restaurants, education and culture, and you can see that the figures here are quite negatively impressive. So there will be definitely the challenge how to address these effects and how to help SMEs to recover. Here is the quarantine which was introduced alongside with the national regime of the restrictions in the beginning of March, where most of the client-serving business activities have been restricted. And since then, there was a continuous debate with the private sector, with the business associations, with other stakeholders, think tanks, on how we can find this balance between protecting health of our citizens and still allow some business sectors, SMEs, to continue to work. As Ukraine, and I believe it's not the only case we can recall, cannot really afford total ban of business activities, given the general economic context and limited budget support if we're talking about SME support programs. So as a result of these debates, you can see that there were several changes which are still taking place on a step-by-step partial release of the quarantine as it relates to certain types of business activities, of course, subject to implementation of sanitary and anti-epidemic measures which were prepared by the Ministry of Health, and the SME Unit office was one of contributing parties to explain SMEs what are the restrictions in place and what measures they need to introduce to comply with these restrictions. So the most recent release was adopted in 11th of May, where big portion of businesses could start work again. And the next milestone would be the May 22, when, depending on the health statistics of COVID-19, the decision will be taken what could be the next quarantine treatment in Ukraine. If we're talking about policy interventions which have been already introduced, the majority of them relate to the taxes and state control measures. So there were a number of reliefs, postponements, and cancellation. If we're talking about payment of taxes by the individual entrepreneurs, in particular, we're talking about the micro business segment. So during the quarantine, they were released from payment of certain types of taxes. And the same relates on imposition of moratorium on state inspections, apart from the health, sanitary, and epidemic measures control, which of course are necessary to undertake in some cases. One of the highlight problems reported by the businesses were rent payments, so they were also in the focus of some changes to the legislation. In particular through extension of force majeure applicability, with explicit reference to quarantine as a reason to negotiate rent postponement or rent cancellation if your business cannot practically work during a quarantine. Other policy intervention relates to financing. In February this year, the National Subsidized Lending Program has been launched, which is basically the complex of two mechanisms, which is about interest rate compensation and partial credit guarantee. Due to the quarantine, which also affected bank sector, key changes relates to providing SMEs with working capital for the purpose to pay salaries, taxes, rent, and ensure that equipment can be served properly, and also refinance with the possibility to obtain zero interest rate loan, which will be valid for the March next year, and then the more economic-based interest rate will replace this zero interest rate. And still discussions around this program on what other types of support are necessary for the businesses now to recover from the quarantine. So in this context, we can also mention the info support, which was provided by the Ministry of Economy and the SME Development Office by launching the dedicated web page on our portal, where in the focus were the restrictions in place. We introduced the question and answers section, where any entrepreneur can ask a question on how the regulations on a quarantine regime should be adopted. A number of online digital tools, online courses and trainings have been also placed there, and more interesting content is still to follow. We will launch the dedicated info campaign by inviting entrepreneurs which managed to adopt their business models to new reality. And by promoting this kind of stories of survival, hope to endorse more entrepreneurs to find a way how to recover, adapt, or change the approach to existing business model. Just right now, we're in the process, if we're talking about the more general context, the government is consolidating the proposals prepared by expert community, by the business association, and we expect the consolidated SME recovery action plan to be adopted in May. The focuses we can expect relate to the access to finance market and development of supporting infrastructure at the regional and local level. Definitely, we expect a focus on a digital solution, and will not also forget about the need to further deregulate business activities for SMEs. More particularly, SME Development Office, alongside with our partners, are now preparing the set of support programs to address liquidity lack, business model adaptation, and to support the most affected sectors. Two highlights, at least I can mention right now, is creative industry sector and tourism sector as well. So hope to share with you more concrete details in the days, weeks to come, as soon as the mentioned action plan is going to be agreed by all the stakeholders involved. And I believe that definitely a role to play for our partners. We cooperate right now, including ILO. So we hope to continue this cooperation in this challenging context as well. For those who are interested, you can find more details on the SME policy portrait about the Ukraine in the recently published SME policy index, which is definitely not addressing some very recent data, but still more broader picture you can find there about Ukraine alongside with other Eastern partner countries. So this is definitely it. If I missed anything, or if there are any questions you have to me about what is going on in Ukraine, I would be happy to respond them. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Andrei, and fantastic presentation. And please stay with us. I can see that questions are coming through for you as well. And we note also your angle on supporting SMEs with the access to finances, access to markets, digitalization, and so on. Okay, so we'll get back to you soon. And now let's go to Vietnam. And let me properly introduce our Vietnamese speaker as well, as I haven't done so properly at the beginning because of the mixture with the speakers. So from Vietnam, we have Mr. Lee Van Quong, who is the director of the SME Technical Assistance Center. So thank you also for joining us today. Vietnam is a very interesting case, such a big country and very few COVID-19 cases. So we really look forward to hearing from you, Quong, more about this, and also what are you doing and how are you supporting SMEs. The floor is yours. Thank you. Quong, are you there? Ah, yes, very good.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lee Van Quong from Vietnam. So can you see my presentation that we sum what will be support needed for the SME? Next slide, please. The first slide is I was talking about the COVID status in Vietnam. In this room, maybe Stefan also recognize everything around him that is nearly normally. But Vietnam is now implemented the social distancing policy, but everyone easily move, not lockdown. So we feel that everything very easy for us to move and to do some work. And Vietnam is a successful case of the COVID pandemic. That Vietnam is the number of infection is nearly 300 people and no death case. So the government now is freely for a company to recovery their production. Next slide, please. And we during the COVID pandemic time, we also have conduct a survey about how when affected to the SME. The survey revealed that more 86% of the company affected by the COVID, but almost SME affected, and their expected revenue in the first months of this year reduced about 70% compared with the last period of 2019, and the company in the stock of business increased rapidly, sharply, around 35%, and the half of business able to maintain their business within the 6 months, and 30% of them only stay in the next 3 months. So now is COVID status is good before, good than before. And during the COVID pandemic, we found that the biggest difficulties of them is the lack of capital, especially the working capital, and the 45 company review that, and they all the some industry have opportunity to promote their business during the COVID time, like example, pharma, medical equipment, and e-commerce or online service. But some production areas for the pharma and medical equipment lack material, because most Vietnam material of the production come from China. At that time, China also in lockdown status. So besides that, the government in the lockdown and restrict people, not the store shopping now stop, but production allowed to activities, but they have no market for their production and service, and the cash flow also not enough for the company, and especially the cost of production, loan, bank loan interest rate, the asset depreciation expense, and many things. Besides that, the salary for the workforce is a problem to the company. So that's the reason why some company move and they need to money for paying wage to labor, but it's not cash flow and working capital, so that they almost of them now the cutting wage and labor number in every company. They also we also found that we also for that around 400,000 workers quit job at that time. If we calculate that, if with each SME have on average number of labor that 25 people, that will be we calculate around 400,000 people lost job. And they also narrow down their production and business service in the downside status. That because at that time there's no markets, no shopping open for them to sell product and service, and some company have changed their production. For example, some textile and garment company may change their product to the producing face mask, and some mechanic company to have import technology for the medical equipment, and some alcohol company to produce an antiseptic liquids for the COVID pandemic. And during the COVID time, some service like e-commerce and online service is very developed in Vietnam at this time. They not try to face-to-face buying, but they have a transaction on internet. Next slide, please. And what does the government action and government do for the SME? Because Vietnam have a goal that reduce COVID pandemic, but we would like to also the social economic development, and we try to reach our target after COVID time, and also reduce GDP of this year reduce to 5%. And international also organization like IMF, ADB also estimate that calculate that Vietnam may be reach GDP this year around 5%, and also we have inflation rate control below the 4% to keep the Vietnamese đồng value. And in the short term, government also have some support for the SME. The first for the reduce to help the SME reduce production costs. The government also discounts 10% of electricity retail in manufacturing and business sectors. And for the capital support, I think that this aspect similar to with previous presentation. Government also have a capital support for the company. The bank will help rescuing the loan payment, interest rate reduction, and exemption, even exemption in for some case, reduce fee, and totally the credit support package for the capital loan is 250 trillion Vietnam dong. The company have allowed to buy with free interest rate to pay salary for employee lost job affected by the COVID pandemic. For the tax support, the government also have extended tax payment time and exemption of the late payment interest due to the COVID, and also reduce land rent, office rent for the companies. And for insurance, social insurance, if the company have a number of labor quit job, they lost 55% of total asset. They have extended for the time for the paying insurance, because the insurance fee also have a heavy cost for the company, because it arouse over 34% of the total salary fund. Also, the government also reduction and exemption fee and charge for the company. Social security package for citizen and business that they during the COVID time they lost job. They will have a fund, no refundable money from the government. The package, the total package is 62 trillion Vietnam dong. And for long term, Vietnam also have a commitment for the social economic development. So the government try to focus in the 5 areas. First is the attracting investment, foreign investment, and domestic from the capital from the domestic economic sectors. Second is attracting capital from FDI, foreign direct investment, and we receive the investment inflow from the other country, like from the China. They quit China and they move the factory into Vietnam for the new project. And the third is we're promoting export. So government now allow to the export for, example, face mask to other country, rice, sticky rice to other country. At 2 months ago, is in higher demand, very high demand from the other country. So Vietnam promote export to the other country. And from the state expand, the government promotes public investment to create jobs for people, for the company, have a new project and engage with the public investment and procurement. And the last one is
sorry, can you just wrap up now? We have 2 minutes for your presentation.
Sorry?
Okay, could you be finishing soon? Could you be wrapping up? Please, we have 2 minutes more for your presentation. So just try to get a main points.
Yeah, okay. Next slide, please. So for the short term, I think that what will be support needed for the SME, the immediate measures for the support SME is support for the unemployed labor affected by the pandemic, and restoring value chain, supply chain that already broken before. So we try to recover this supply chain for the SME, because now its chain is not before, because some supplier from China also move as a country, and or as they may stop their production. So it's new supply chain for the company. The third one is the maintaining the stable raw material for production, because most like as I mentioned before, most raw material from China. So we keep the try to maintain the raw material for the domestic production. From a market side, we try to expand market expansion for the SME by stimulating the domestic market and raise demand consumption to encourage people consumption of Vietnam product. And but by sector, we try to support the SME in the essential good, and the sector that higher much affected by the COVID, like tourism, accommodation, retail, and e-commerce service. But for the long term, what support need for the SME is we try to into restructuring business model and technology, and promoting the digitalized management and optimize production and business for SME, because by the COVID time, some company maybe have a need to optimize their production to saving costs, change their business model and technology for the sustainable development in the future. I think that is for the long-term measure for the SME in the future. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for your presentation. Yes, really amazing handling by your government of COVID-19. We can see big impact on the SMEs as well economically. And in terms of support, I noticed that you are looking from, quite a lot from a supply side, and looking at the supply policies on restoring value chains, maintaining raw materials stability for production, but also from the demand side, supporting the unemployed and so on. So there is some cash in the economy. Okay, so we have lots of questions actually, and we have only a few minutes left. I will propose we go a couple of minutes over the time if you can, people can stay. We are going to definitely share all the PowerPoint presentations with you, and also what we are going to share with you is the presentation of a survey, global survey from SCORE that Stefan was going to present, but he didn't. So I think that would be also very useful. And finally, we have your all email addresses because of registration. So we will answer to those who have asked directly to the ILO, and I've seen a number of questions about how we're going to actually provide support in this new environment, so we can answer that later. Okay, now let's go through some questions here quickly. So there was a question from McTunsey to, let me just see, McTunsey, yes, to Amelia, quickly, Amelia. McTunsey asks, how do you see South African government, how do you get South African government to ramp up the role of Productivity South Africa in your interventions? So Amelia, can you give us that angle, please?
Okay. From a South Africa perspective, Productivity SA is a state entity. South Africa needs to emulate the productivity policies and frameworks adopted by the countries with competitiveness scores, over 70. And what has been key to the success ultimately of those countries has been that productivity is the center of all aspects within that country and the importance of it thereafter. And when we speak about it, we actually have approached government on driving productivity, within government and throughout the country, and prioritizing it, even through making a month of productivity, like October, a month of productivity. So recognizing it in all our interventions or all policies and so forth. So productivity is not recognized within our country in all sectors, and even within government itself, it's very difficult. But the way government can support us is, of course, at the moment they fund us, but to further fund us on the initiatives. We have a number of initiatives, like right now, turnaround strategies for businesses, especially SMEs, are so important. So, funding towards that. But at the end of the day, to productivity is everybody's responsibility. And this is what we need to relate this message. And if it comes from government, it becomes everybody's responsibility within the country as well. So using available resources, that means having champions of productivity that's in the private sector, in government, and so forth, would play such a huge role. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And stay online, because we have another question which is really relevant to all speakers from Rania, and I think Andre has already answered it to some extent. We didn't talk much about informal enterprises here. So you talked about support that the government has been providing so far to SMEs, but is that really linked to formality status? So is formality, what Rani is basically asking, which is really a good question, is formality of small enterprises a prerequisite to access the support provided in South Africa?
In South Africa, informal economy actually provides like 3 million jobs. So government has encouraged spaza shops, or general dealers, the local traders, to register. But when I say register, we're saying register on their database. So yes, to a certain extent, to be able to access the different types of available support, yes, they would have to be registered on their database. So they wouldn't have to be, they just have to be registered on the database. But there's a number of initiatives that I alluded to. Also with that, the Department of Small Businesses has a national informal business upliftment strategy that they are implementing. And I think they've identified even in the portfolio committee that the registration of these businesses or the informal traders to be eligible is important. But how do they go about doing that? And that's one of the that they're going to try to enhance. Yeah.
Sure. And Quang, what about in Vietnam? I mean, is formality of small enterprises a prerequisite to access of some of the support you've been giving to SMEs and micro firms? You have to unmute yourself, Quang. I hope Quang is still with us. No, maybe not. Okay. Andre, you have already answered that question. Can you just quickly summarize from Ukraine perspective so we can all hear it?
Well, basically concerning formality, there are several angles to answer this question. First of all, going to informal sector is one of the survival strategies we can observe in the past weeks. That's one angle to look at this question. Another one is definitely formality is the criteria for the entrepreneur to apply for whatever support program which is in place or we are envisaging. The way to address informal sector could be somehow relative, not really to the business support measures, but rather to the social support, which is also considering and implementing by the government. If we're talking about officially registered unemployed persons or persons applying for the subsidy with employment centers. So, but otherwise, there is no way you can receive a subsidy or participate in the for instance, SME subsidized lending program.
Okay, so that's a challenge for those that are really informal. But whilst I have you there, there is another question from Charlene, Andre, on do you have statistics about the effects of COVID-19 on SME owned by women in your country? Do you have specials?
As we do have a few dedicated, mainly donor-funded initiatives in Ukraine working specifically with women-led businesses, there might conducted some surveys among them. So far, I do not have that type of information. Mm-hmm. If we're talking about more broadly, if we're considering now any specific interventions to particularly support women-led businesses, there is nothing like that so far. So it is considering in more general context of supporting micro and small businesses led both by men and women.
I see. Okay. Kong, if you're online, can you just chip in as well? Because I see that you are on, but I don't hear you. So unmute yourself and say, I'm here, so I'll ask you a question if you're there. Now, there is a question from Helen about online training. What do we see as demand now? What subjects are the enterprises interested in? Amelia, I think you talked about COVID-19. It seems to me, and we're picking that up from the ILO as well. There's lots of demand on that. What about business continuity planning? Is that something that it's sought after in South Africa?
Definitely so. I think the whole aspect of even looking or re-looking at a business model altogether has played a role. So there's definitely a need for business continuity, looking at agility of business, flexibility at the end of the day. So yes, it is very relevant from our enterprises. And then as you alluded to, the OSH itself, so occupational health and safety. And then I brought up the capacity planning now, especially in our environment, working at different levels of capacity. That's the other training that is available online and that is very relevant to companies.
Yes, and yeah, as I said, from our side too, OSH COVID-19 and business continuity are the two top requests that we are seeing now for online training. And there is a good question from Justice to, again, to Andre. It is about business model of the SME agency. That's an interesting one. The question is, what are the key changes that should happen in business model of agencies that support SME sustainability? You run the SME agency, Andrea, of Ukraine. How do you answer that? Should anything change?
Well, definitely changes are to come, especially knowing that in Ukraine, SME Development Office is still not an agency. If we're talking about any conventional type of agencies we have in neighboring countries as well. So we're still as an advisory body to the ministry, and in the context of those support measures which are being presented to the Prime Minister, to the other stakeholders, it is obvious for everyone that there should be some vehicle to basically implement and monitor these type of interventions. And this is exactly the context where creating the agency to replace, to succeed, I would rather say, the activity of the current model we have, this SME Development Office, is going to be considered. At the same time, in Ukraine, if we're talking about this institutional support infrastructure, there are already several actors in place. If we're talking about, for instance, startup support, there is a dedicated startup fund to the Ministry of Finance, and another entrepreneurship development fund to the same minister, which is implementing the lending programs for SMEs. So there is quite diversified approach we have. Like in another example, that we have a dedicated expert promotion office, which specifically working with the expert-oriented SMEs. So SME Development Office is to take its own niche, mainly working with traditional innovative SMEs as well, and in particular with the focus on implementation and coordination of measures which are being designed these days.
Okay, we got you. Sorry, we didn't hear last like 30 seconds.
Well, okay, no problem. I can repeat. I've been telling that in Ukraine we have a diversified approach to this institutional support ecosystem we have, with a dedicated agency to work with expert-oriented SMEs. I'm talking about Expert Promotion Office, Startup Fund, and Entrepreneurship Support Fund to the Ministry of Finance, which is specifically implementing the SME lending programs for SMEs. That is one I mentioned in the presentation. So SME Development Office and the expected modality is specifically to respond to the need to implement those recovery measures which are being planned and discussed with the expert community and our partners supporting Ukraine in this context. So I hope that these changes are going to take place quite soon.
Okay, thank you for that. Look, we have so many questions, but I think we should be wrapping up. We promised 1 hour. We knew we might be a little bit over, but I think it's unfair now to carry on like this for too long. The questions that we can answer later that are aimed at the ILO, as I said, we will. Could we actually now see what are the key takeaways? Because before we wrap up, we want to kind of capture the key points from our discussion today, because this is something that we've been working in parallel, and we'd like to also share this with you before you, okay, I see it, before we finish today. So in the short term, what we see is that keeping SMEs safe and operational, it's very important, and we see a number of actions there on occupational health and safety, business continuity, building management capacity, and so on. As I said, we've been seeing those requests through our network as well. The second one is it's about the cash flow, right? Is easing the financial burdens, And yeah, we know that with the lending, subsidized lending, tax reliefs, credit schemes, and so on. And what's really critical in the short term is the safeguarding social protection for workers, right? And this is hopefully expanding social security measures and providing support packages and so on. The long term is it's an interesting one and a little bit challenging, of course, because we have to find a way how to restore disrupted supply chains. I was going to say, for example, from our survey, global survey, 6 out of 10 enterprises said, you know, we can't operate because we're not getting material in. I mean, the supply chains are gone. And then, of course, it's on demand side. You know, we have to put some cash in people's hands to boost this demand through various stimulus packages, and overall to drive entrepreneurship and innovation going forward. We are talking now in the ILO about building back better. So it's not going back to the same old business because it has to be better business. And that means really giving a targeted support to informal businesses and marginalized workers. You know, we're going to actually soon launch an infographic to show how many informal enterprises and workers in those enterprises are at risk. And I looked at the figures, and there's about 430 million of self-employed in informal economy globally that are actually hugely at risk because they actually operate in those sectors, 5 or 6, that are really badly affected by COVID-19. So that's something that is really big challenge for us and for the whole world, how to handle informality. Then, of course, building resilience. You know, tourism has been hit hard. How do you go about that? And overall, boosting SME resilience through management capacity building. So these are basically some of the takeaways that we would share with you. I would say from our side that we've now come to the end of our webinar. I wish to say first big thanks to all 3 presenters today for their great contribution. And thank you all to all participants for staying with us till 155, and we are over the time. What we're going to take from here is really look at some key takeaways from your side as well. And we want to really, the purpose of that was to see whether we need to adjust and how to adjust our offerings to meet the new expectations from today. Stay well, stay healthy, take care of yourself, have a fantastic day and enjoy your weekend. That's it from the SME unit. Thank you all. It was a pleasure to have you with us today. Great. Thank you.